right in the middle of this amazing epistle that talks about the transformation that salvation is. You are not the same. You are a new creation. So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. But you did not learn Christ in this way. If indeed you have heard him and have been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit, and that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. What marks a person who is unconverted is unrighteousness, unholiness, and deception. The transformation produces one who has been created in righteousness and holiness and truth. Because you have been transformed, here is how you are to live. And so I want to read verses 25 to 27. This is where Paul begins the practical part of this epistle. Notice the two sins that he starts with. Therefore, since you have been made new in righteousness, holiness, and truth, therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth each one of you with his neighbor. For we are members of one another. Be angry and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not give the devil an opportunity. Of all the sins that Paul could have started with, at the top of the list, it should be somewhat interesting to you that the first two sins he is concerned that Christians renounce, that's what laying aside means, to completely renounce, are lying and anger. Lying and anger. And they are associated, by the way, specifically with the devil in verse 27. Lying and anger are the primary operational techniques of Satan. We know that because Jesus in John 8:44 said, the devil is a liar and the father of lies, and he is a murderer from the beginning. And obviously the ultimate end of hate is murder. Even if you don't murder, but you hate, you're a murderer in your heart. And hatred and murder are the fruit of anger. This should be obvious to you because you've lived it out. We all have. The two commonest human default sins are lies and anger. This is the initial default of all fallenness. The entire human race easily moves into lies and into anger. They're the very categories of sin that are the absolute default position of a fallen human race. It's where sinners go easily. And we see that from the very youngest child. What characterizes young children? Lies and anger. It doesn't take very long. Maybe by the time they're 2, they have begun to try to deceive you. And when you ask them at the age of 3 or 4 if they did that, they'll say no. So when you welcome that beautiful little baby into your home, you just brought in a born liar who is hostile and angry. And then you're surprised when you say no, and he slams himself on the floor and throws a tantrum. This is the foundation of hate and murder. You stood in his way. You interrupted his will. Psychologists say that by the time children are 4, they have mastered the art of lying. Doesn't take long. And just to remind you, Psalm 58:3, because some of you are saying, not my baby. So I'm going to remind you of Psalm 58:3. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies. Your child is a born liar. We're all born liars. That is the default position of all fallen human beings. And this is consistent with how Satan operates as a liar and a hateful killer. And since the whole world lies in the power of the evil one, 1 John 5:19, this infects the entire human race, and as I just quoted for you, does so from the time they come from the womb. This is the initial evidence of human depravity. But when you are converted, when you're regenerated, when you are transformed, you become truthful and loving. That's the dynamic transformation that takes place. Verse 21, since truth is in Jesus, verse 21, since you have left behind your former manner of life, since you have been, verse 23, renewed in the spirit of your mind, since you have put on the new self in the likeness of God, created in righteousness and holiness of the truth, stop lying. Stop lying. The positive side of that came back in chapter 4, verse 15, speaking the truth in love. We are the people of the truth. We live in a world of liars.
Lying's obviously a huge problem, and this kind of deception becomes more and more tolerable with people as they practice it as well. You often see people or hear people say, oh, it was a white lie. And the more they practice lying, the more tolerable it becomes, almost like their conscience being seared. This then flows into other forms of deception, which we'll discuss here, such as cheating on your spouse, which the gentleman calls infidelity. Listen to what he says here. Cheating is the most painful thing you can do to your loved one.
Things I wish I'd known before we got married.
We're seeing young couples whose marriages are being broken up. Half of all new marriages, as you know, in America fail within the first 5 years.
Infidelity is one of the most painful experiences that a betrayed spouse can encounter in life. For most women, it's more painful than rape or physical abuse. Now, that is an astonishing statement, and there are a lot of people that don't believe it. I was testifying in the state Senate 3 years ago, and I was representing a human rights organization on a particular issue that had to do with mental health. And I was talking to the president of a national human rights organization while I was there. And I said, the reason I want to see laws against infidelity is because it's the most painful experience anybody can have if they are the betrayed spouse. It's more painful than rape, and it's more painful than physical abuse. And for many women I've talked to, it's more painful than even losing your own children. It's the most painful thing that any person can do to anybody else. Well, this lady that I was working with said, well, I have to tell you something. I was gang raped when I was 17. And it was a horrible experience, something that it took me quite a while to overcome. I had counseling. But when my husband had an affair 10 years later, I can tell you That was the worst experience I'd ever had. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I agree entirely with you that infidelity is probably the worst thing that anybody can experience.